How do you align a team that doesn't seem to be on the same page? Find out today on the art and science of difficult conversations. Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when you communicate better, you live better. As always, I'm Chris of Leadership Potential. I'm joined by Lucy of Mind Fittery. And Lucy, have you had leaders personally that could find that balance between being caring about the people part, but also making sure people stayed on track to perform well?
I think that's a common challenge for a lot of leaders.
Yeah,
And they're
I think
asking,
so.
how do I do that?
Mm.
What about you, Chris?
I Sadly, it's a little bit harder, even in the nonprofit space. I've had
Mm.
leaders that are either too focused on the caring part, especially in the nonprofit space. It's very too much focused on the caring and the social justice and the identity and all that stuff, and less on the performance. And then what I find is interesting though is as I get higher and higher in the organization, those people tend to be more focused on performance and less on the people and the feelings and stuff like that. So it's very interesting shift as you get to the higher level. But that's why I'm excited. A few years ago, I wrote a white paper on implementing strategic plans, overcoming those barriers. And one guy I interviewed, we just connected just because number
Mhm.
one, we're both Asian, so we got that Asian love going on. But also, he's got that balance. He's figured out a way to lead through that balance and motivated by helping both individuals and teams grow, and he's a real deal. He's been doing it for many, many
Nice.
years at the local level, at the national level, at lots of different organizations, at the executive level. And so I think it's impressive that this guy is the real deal. He's motivated by helping everybody grow, helping everybody perform at their best. But he also is focused on being grounded in actual strategies and tactics that turn that vision into real measurable results. And at the time I first met him, he was an executive director of a fairly large nonprofit, and now he's moved on to something else in the executive position. But today we are excited to have Will Hobart. Will, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Chris and Lucy, and thank you for those kind words and warm introduction.
So let me ask you this: you've done a lot of different things, right? You've led teams of multiple hundreds of people. You've been a teacher of middle school, which is probably the
Mhm.
hardest job I would imagine ever. Were you always comfortable with hard conversations? Like, did you grow up like really leaning into these hard conversations of all sorts?
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for that question. And teaching was my first job out of college, and it set me up for so much of what has become a foundation of my leadership and the values that
Mm,
I carry. But I'll say this, um hindsight, as an adult, you have completely different insights here. But I went to and shout out Iowa City, Iowa, and Longfellow Elementary, where I grew up. But I was in a program called the PALS program, and it was for fourth through sixth graders, and we were trained to do conflict resolution. And,
mm.
I'll be honest, I think I signed up because there was a pizza party at the end of the year and a field trip for those students that became pals. But, ultimately what we were taught is, you would serve like a recess a week, or maybe it was a month, I forget. But, we would wear these fun little yellow vests that say pals. And we were trained to basically be on the playground and help our peers solve disagreements. And our little protocol, I think it was like 5 or 6 questions, but it was like, what's your side of the story? What did you experience? How did you feel? How did the other person's actions make you feel? And then ultimately, like, what's the resolution? How are we going to move forward from this? And, you know, fifth graders aren't inspired necessarily to go talk to their friends or peers about their problems, but when told, like, work it out with the pals or miss the next recess, like, people were choosing to talk to pals. And so as I look
Mm.
back fondly on elementary, which you can do when you're my age now, like, um, I really think that was one of those foundational moments where I was trained at a young developmental age of like, there are lots of different perspectives to a situation, and people can all be right, and people can all have things that maybe weren't right. And part of what's a big part of the resolution is being open to hearing what the other's point of view was. and reflecting on it
Mm.
and thinking about it and kind of stepping outside of your own, like what you felt and how you experienced that conflict. And so I do look back now and think, not just because I'm in education and a teacher, but the opportunity at that such a young age, 10, 11, 12, to really be thinking about how am I exposing myself to thinking about others besides just my own experiences.
When you're leading larger groups and you're like you're as an executive, you're making bigger decisions and sometimes things feel like they're like moving very fast. How do you then balance that need for that thing you learned about like I need to listen to other people's opinions, but also you're like, but we need to get things going. We can't like wait forever and like explore everybody's feelings forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, that is the trickiness of it all. And I think one of the things that I, really credit a lot of this to is the time I've spent, the coaching I've received from others, the inspiration, frankly, of personal insight, recognizing what is it that what are my tendencies? I think about, I grew up in an environment, again, shout out to my parents, but one of the things that they instilled in me in a very young age was it's not a matter of when you go to college or if you go to college, it's when and where and what do you want to do. And my dad would talk a lot when I was growing up about delayed gratification. And again, like a 13-year-old doesn't really know what that means, but he would talk about it like, invest in yourself and your learning and be curious about what the world has to offer because that will allow you to live the life you want to live later and that will allow you to have the impact that you're meant to have. And I really tried to take that into my adult life and my professional life as invitations to just try to learn and absorb as much as I can. um, Another quick personal story about myself is, I really struggled academically. I was really
Mm.
motivated to do well, but I struggled. And, I'll never forget this. Um, I took the ACT, college entrance exam. This is back in the late 90s, 3 times. And the highest I ever got on the kind of reading section was a 17. And at that time, an 18 was kind of considered college ready. And so, had all these ambitions to go to college. And this very important test was telling me maybe I wasn't ready for it. And what I
Mm.
internalized there was grit. How do I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to try harder. I'm going to have to apply myself in every situation. And I think that really, again, credit to my parents for instilling that work ethic in me as well. But I think I said, as I become a leader, as I become my adult self, one of the things that I really that is a constant for me is that how do you ask questions? How do you be curious about what you're seeing? How can you contribute in a way that is adding value to the team that I'm on or the organization that I work for? And I think that, again, the insights have come later, which is why I think it's such an important gift that I've been given kind of as I become a more mature leader. But being able to look back at those moments and say, well, I was really stressed in those environments, or I really felt, kind of being pulled both in terms of what the strategy was and also how I'm feeling as an individual contributor to kind
Mm.
of make sense of that as like, that's the intersection of your ambition and the kind of emotional intelligence that you're trying to develop, like all of those things coming together. Sometimes it feels really good, but a lot of times it doesn't. And a lot of times those are
Mm.
the opportunities that like later on you can look back and say, what can I learn from that? How did I grow? And what does that mean for me in terms of what kind of leader I want to become? How do I want to inspire people around me given the lessons that I've learned during kind of my developmental years?
Mm.
I think it's very powerful. What's coming up for me is like really your level of awareness of how your ambition and your mindset has been formed not only through your parents, but also through your experiences. And really looking at how, even when it's hard, if I persevere, I have the grit that I'm going to get to that result. And you've mentioned ambition and who I want to be as a leader. And here's a question that just came to my mind. What is your ambition as a leader? What
Uh,
drives you?
yeah, it's interesting how that's changed and evolved as I've gotten older. So, I was after I served as a middle school special education teacher out of college, I did returned to college and pursued a master's degree. And as I was kind of wrapping up that program and thinking about my goals, I like jotted down, I said, by the time I'm 30, I'd like to obtain this title and have this salary and maybe be a part of this leadership development program. And I like went out through like, I think 55.
Mm,
And it's been fun over the years to go back to that and see
Nice.
what's real, what's not, what was my ambition at 26 when I thought this was going to be the life plan that I would have. It's interesting. A lot of the core has been the same, which is
Amazing.
grow in social justice impact sector. I really wanted to continue public education, service, and leadership. And so my first real goal was to go work for Chicago Public Schools, go spend time in the system that was responsible for educating hundreds of thousands of Chicagoans each year and learn and grow and contribute. And, that I did that. I spent 6 years after graduate school really spending time. And I say I grew up professionally at CPS. And you talk about the intersection of feelings and interpersonal stuff and goals and outcomes. You work, when you're a public servant working for the public education system, schools open every year on a certain day. Teachers need to be in the classroom. Logistics and operations have to happen. Timelines may get crunched. Deadlines might change, but like people may come and go. Financial crises may come and come or not be. But you have to open the school doors and you have to make sure everybody has what they need to serve the students of Chicago. And so I grew up in a very rigid environment that way that had a lot of, there wasn't really time for feelings. There was time to
mm,
had to get things done. And, as a deeply emotional person, it was this like compartmentalizing experiences where it's like, okay, head down, get the things done. But then at night in moments of more quietness, like, oh my God, like that didn't feel good or that was really tough. And like I could see the wear and tear on my colleagues and we're all just kind of following through on the things that we need to have, but there doesn't feel like the space to like be our full authentic selves. And the things that have become more a custom part of workplaces and particularly in nonprofits in my experience. And so that remains such a solid foundation for me. But you think about growth of ambition, it's evolved. So like what had been so much focus on execution and outcomes and outputs because the system required it. Now it's like, I know the importance of it, but I've also learned what happened when you work in an environment where you just can't bring that into the equation as much because there's just the urgency and the pace doesn't allow for it. And so that's
mm,
given me this added perspective now to be able to say, how do I make space for that? How do I work in environments where I really need to be in a place that's got goals and objectives that are pretty clear, direction that we're heading as an organization, but also that there's a culture that allows for people to reflect and to
Mhm.
process their feelings and like because it's a part of human nature in my experience. And so whether you create
yeah,
space for it or not, people are going to struggle with how to bring themselves into their roles. And um yeah, it's a lot of really important parts that have helped kind of shape the ambition and how I see myself kind of as I move forward.
I love that. Thank you. Sounds like the ambition is not just getting things done, but also achieving in a way that's sustainable and that feels good ideally.
Yeah. I think there's also, the point in it's well documented in kind of professional growth, but like where you become not just an individual contributor, but you're then in a role or a position that's responsible for making sure others who are individual contributors or team leaders, right, are
yeah,
positioned for success and your job description and what you're accountable for are essentially their outcomes and their output. And I think, again, hindsight 2020, I was in my first manager role at 27, managing people on average who were many more years of experience than I did, certainly deeper expertise in their particular functional areas. And one of the things I learned the hard way was that they all had different needs from me. Some of them were the younger,
mm,
they were in a position where they were looking to grow, they wanted to climb kind of that position ladder. Others had done their work for decades and
mm,
were their ambition showed up as like each year, I want to make sure I do this better. I'm uniquely positioned to lead this function for the district. And what they needed from me was blocking and tackling from the distractions and the other things that were happening. But I didn't have that
Mm.
self awareness or that leadership awareness at that age. It took me a little bit of time to kind of develop that. And I think that's another big part of this for me that I've gotten more clarity around is once you realize that people that you are leading or teams that you're working with have different needs and the ambition shows up differently, you then become the diverse, like more diversified in your tactics and how you support them. And that's actually, the crux of the real insights I gained for myself is like, oh, that actually feels really good to know that this person needs this from me. And that is a better approach than trying to be equal and like, well, everybody's going to get check-ins from me this way. And we're going to use the same agenda structure for like, you got to listen to what people really need and how their um, success over time has led them to their own sets of insights about what is works best for them and allows them to kind of lead in their best ways. And that's been really empowering, I'll say personally, as a leader to
Mm.
kind of learn that there's more tools and resources I can look to kind of make sure that I'm being the um, leader or thought partner that people that I'm working with kind of really need from me.
Mm.
Mm. I would say that also shows your strength of empathy and having the ability to pause and reflect and think about people and their needs. For some leaders or for somebody who is maybe a new leader or leaders that have been for years in that I need to get things done mode. I don't have the time.
Mhm.
They should just get their job done too. What would you say it costs them when they don't realize that people are motivated in different ways and they have different needs?
Yeah. And I'll speak again from personal experience and lessons that I've learned. I think that, Chris referenced earlier, I had the opportunity to serve as a regional executive director for a national nonprofit. And there were many objectives and priorities that organization had. National growth aspirations, continuing to deepen in geographies they currently, were working in and launching in new communities. And so wide range of people's focus areas and attention. And as the regional executive director, I was responsible for raising the resources, cultivating the funding to support all of the local implementation, and as well as make sure that the program team was equipped to be successful in the implementation of an evidence based, well documented, researched, and evaluated program model.
Mm.
And so you can already start to feel it's like a bit of Gumby. It's like, well, what are we talking about within this region? Knowing that the organization as a whole is talking about larger growth aspirations. And knowing that I had many members of my regional team here in Chicago doing a very tight curriculum. Like you do this, you ask these questions, you meet with the students this many times, you're checking the boxes. It's high fidelity, yielding high impact. And one of the things that I didn't fully embrace until it was a little too late, to be honest, was recognizing that not everybody on the team shared the understanding or the position that I was in and the position, therefore, that I was leading from. So a lot of times, what I would talk about with the
Mm.
team was, let's talk. You're having such a great impact in what you're doing locally. Let's make sure we have a seat at the table in these larger, more kind of collective impact settings and partnership opportunities, working with other initiatives that are bringing resource and attention to our mission. From the seat I sat, and that was a really strategic point of view, right? Like, how do
Yeah.
we make sure we are relevant in the spaces around college access, persistence, and success? For members of the team, leaders on the team who were responsible for high fidelity implementation consistently to a wide range of students across the state of Illinois, that was less interesting. That was less relevant to
Mm.
their impact and the work that they did. And my initial read on some of that was, though they're not ambitious, they're not looking for this opportunity to lead and grow. When I was their age, I was asking all these questions about how to contribute to more strategic conversations and growth opportunities and deepening impact and broadening impact. I had more of a systemic lens at 27, so why don't they? And I
Mhm.
think what I learned, and this was after getting a lot of really hard feedback, was that's just not the seat we sit in. Well, like that's not our point of view. It's not why I came to work at this organization. I didn't come to work with students directly and make a quick pivot into
Mm.
national or regional leadership. I came here because I care deeply about first generation college students and I want to spend my time working with them. And I want to make sure I'm supported in all of the distractions that can come, which might include working with new partners who have new asks of us. Like
Mm.
I was excited by a new partnership opportunity and there was people who were like, no, they're going to make demands of us that are outside of what I'm currently already stretched too thin to do. And I
Mm.
think, that learning and that insight of like, well, how do I make sure that I am validating what I've learned about them, but also know that like in my role to be successful, I'm going to have to be out there navigating some of these partnership or new ways of thinking about how we are engaging in the broader funding community or in the nonprofit space. And I think that's a part where I ultimately had to kind of come to terms with it myself. Like, how comfortable, Will, are you as a leader who cares? Lucy, I appreciate you naming this, like, feels deeply empathic toward my staff and my team, but also know that, like, from a strategic perspective, and then from like a what are the goals here? How much money do I need to raise perspective? That was pulling me in a way that was through my behaviors and actions, you know, showing up as not empathic to my team. And I
Mm.
think that was one of those moments, and I called it a little bit of my midlife crisis where I was like, I have to come to terms with this. Like, how comfortable am I pursuing strategic work where I know there's this inherent tension with the empathy and the kind of emotional EQ that I was feeling I needed to be paying attention to with my team that felt like it was sitting squarely in tension with some of the things I needed to do in my role.
Mm. Was there anything specific that started you on the journey of self-awareness, or did you get feedback from somebody specifically about that?
Yeah, I mean, this was a strength of that organization is that they did pretty comprehensive feedback surveys for the
Mm.
staff. And there was a lot, I think there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there personally of like how much and how frequent are you asking for feedback? But I think, because of that, I was able to gain some really important insights and I was able to get themes from the team,
Great.
both, it wasn't all bad, but it was here's the parts that are really resonating. And frankly, what was probably the most eye opening for me was realizing, I think a phrase you may hear a lot, like intent versus impact. I think one of the things that was most eye opening for me was like the places where I was getting constructive feedback. I was like, well, that was not my intention. My intention was this. And
Mm.
this was a whole new level of like, oh, the impact was received in these themes. Um, doesn't really matter what my intent was. The people on the team, those on right on the ground working with students,
Yeah.
like were feeling this. And so that was once I kind of had a moment, it became this real like, okay, I have to really zero in on what am I doing to convey my intent, knowing that how people receive it ultimately, right, is how it was communicated or like the actual what people heard. It doesn't matter to some degree, large degree, the intent that I initially had.
Mm. That's one of the biggest leadership lessons I learned early on also was that
Mhm,
it doesn't matter what you intended to do. Like,
mhm.
nobody's really gonna care even if they, like, knew all the deep down, like, it doesn't really matter. It's really about how it impacts them and how it makes them feel
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. And for somebody who has always been a person who's really been thoughtful about how I think I wanna show up, that was a real I'm just gonna be vulnerable here. That
Yeah.
was like almost character assassination, maybe a little bit dramatic there, but that was like "Oh my god, I'm not who I think I am," or people really don't understand. Like, what's my authentic self in the space if all this energy I'm putting into the intention isn't yielding the impact that I would hope or expect. And I think that's a different layer, maybe a deeper layer to this ambition component is like my initial reads on that was like, well, they're the problem, right? Like I'm being super intentional. The impact is not there. So therefore, like they're just not aligned to the mission and vision in the same way that I am, and that's the problem.
Hmm.
And again, we can go deeper on some of this, but I think that's a really important part that I kind of got to. It was hard, but it was like, wait a minute. No, it's not that they're not ambitious. It's not that they're not into what we're doing. It's actually they're coming at this from a different lens. They're coming at this from a different place. And frankly, some of this is positional differences. How do they understand that as somebody responsible for raising money, um, that what I'm anchoring to, the signals that I'm getting, the things that I'm paying attention to are going to inherently be in tension in some ways with what they're doing. And I think we talk about like what could leaders talk more about? That to me is one of those things. Like, how can we just name there's tension in nonprofits that exist between those responsible, in my opinion, in my experience, those
Hmm.
responsible for cultivating resources and those responsible for putting those resources to good use and having an impact. And I think the more we talk about like this isn't a personal thing. This is about the fact that there is a dance here that happens with tension and there are trade-offs as there are in everything in life in my opinion, right? I
Yeah, yeah,
think that's a
yeah.
big part that I use the word trade-off like 15 times a week now. I'm like, well, let's talk about what the trade-offs are if we do this. Because there are some. And I think being more explicit about the fact that somebody's going to
Yes.
have to, some perspective is going to have to give and take on this, and just using that word explicitly, I feel like helps ease some of that like negotiation tension that can happen if you just aren't direct about it. Where he's like, no, are we all going to get what we want here? And then later it's
Hmm.
like, no, we actually didn't. Like, how do you talk about now? It's like, it's unlikely here we're going to land in everybody's ideal situation
Yeah.
or outcome. So, what are the trade offs we need to be talking about as a leadership team um, as we move forward in this direction or in this particular decision?
Yeah. I'd love to stick into that because I think when I work with teams or organizations, I think this is one of the biggest sticking points is are they even aligned on the same page? Are they reading the same page? Are they rowing in the same direction? Or are they reading different books and different libraries altogether? Or are they, or they just have different ways of getting to that same vision? And so how do you like to navigate those conversations? How do you make them more explicit as opposed to just this like hidden undercurrent?
Yeah, great question. I think so. One of the things, my first kind of role and opportunity after spending, you know, 8 years total in public education administration and teaching was working for a nonprofit that had been around for over 90 years, founded by social workers in Chicago. And they were doing school based mental health support. Over the years, they had developed really innovative approaches to how do you get teenagers who have been exposed to deep amounts of trauma into cognitive behavior group interventions. Like not
Nice.
an easy ask. And one of the things that they did was they created this program, shout out youth guidance and becoming a man, that had these really compelling results at the individual level, the school level, and in society. And they were getting asked by funders and city community leaders all over the country, like, you're having profound impacts on high school graduation rates. You're increasing on time graduation. You're decreasing violent crime involvement for participants, particularly of young men of color in urban environments. And, you think of an organization who's been around for 90 years, run by social workers who don't, as a theme, believe you can replicate themselves. Like being asked, like, how do you replicate what you do? How do you put this program and bring these incredible counselors and this program into the lives of many, many more youth? And to go there after spending time in such a rigid environment that was and resource constrained environment, which was the public education system at that time, to suddenly be like, wait a minute, we can expand and we can do more with more, as opposed to do more with less. We can do more with more because we can inspire others to understand the impacts of our programs, and that will enable the program to grow. And a big part of what we spent time doing was like, and I came in as their kind of inaugural chief program officer, was like listening. I listened to board members, but I also listened to staff. And I just realized, like, my goodness, not everybody is like on board with this, like, we gonna go big.
Mm,
There's a lot of like, well, wait a minute, we have the program that serves young women. Why isn't it ready to grow? We had, but what about this program that's happening right here? This is really good. Why don't we grow? And I, it was again an experience where I was like, wait a minute, everybody is so aligned with this mission. Everybody is so locked into the impacts that we're having, but their perspectives and their perceptions of what would be required of them or the organization to do this expansion was all over the board. I mean, some people were like, it's fine. It can happen here. I'm going to keep doing what I do. Other people were like, well, how am I possibly going to be able to stay focused on this if I'm also having to contribute to the growth agenda of the organization? And, that yields such different reactions, again, ranging from what I just described, but also like anxiety and worry. And as soon as we get big, it's the impact's going to go down. There's no way we can preserve what has been so
mm,
special if we grow this quickly. Because the numbers being thrown around were quite large, triple the number in 3 years.
wow.
Increased staff from 40 to 120 in 3 years. Like
Wow.
where we felt like we had such a unicorn job description for the program. That you created a lot of different a lot of the perspectives were out there about what we should be doing. And of course, your board of directors are a whole another level of that. And when you have a lot of entrepreneurials and business leaders who get the mission, but whose professional jobs are scale, expand, be more efficient, like
Yeah.
grow, there was a lot of dynamic and pressure there. And again, this has been themes at all the nonprofits I've worked at. And I see it with colleagues that work at other places I've not worked, where it's like, oh, the board has a vision. They think that we need to be everywhere tomorrow or yesterday. And so managing board expectations, aligning with what the leadership staff positions believe, and then know that those actually who were responsible for getting the outcomes that are compelling growth are likely sitting in a completely different space about what's possible. Like, I just think being the keeper of that diversity became a big part of my identity in that role. Was like, okay, they need someone to come to. I kind of referred to myself in some ways as a bartender. It's like, okay, I need this person to feel like they can come to me and just be like, these are my worries, these are my anxieties. Help me understand what the vision is here. And how do I stay aligned with what I believe the organization's vision is on this, and also, like, and what's an authentic response to somebody who is deeply concerned or deeply excited, all ends of these spectrums, right, about what's happening.
Mhm,
And how can I not overpromise, but also be somewhat specific in what I'm offering that gives them confidence that, like, oh no, this guy has my back. This guy understands what we're talking about. He's willing to kind of step into those difficult conversations either on my behalf or with me in a way that allows me to know that, like, there's somebody hearing this perspective and it's being considered in the
mhm,
decisions that are being made.
mm,
A lot of things come up for me. Um, One of them, I hear it also from clients in huge corporations where also, let's say, a tech startup scaled really fast and the culture's changed. And now somebody that's been with the company when they started, when everybody was a tight team, and now they blew up and exploded, which is wonderful. But at the same time, it's also changing the culture
yeah,
and the goals and the pressure on making more money. And especially right now with the layoffs, I hear the challenge of the leaders. They feel the pressure from the board to cut costs, and they also want to be empathetic leaders. And they see this inner conflict. And I'm hearing also that conflict. It sounds like it's everywhere. All the leaders that want to find that balance. Another thing I was hearing, I wonder if it's not about actually the different ambitions, but if people don't talk about them and don't find a way to align. What would you say how to open up the conversation or how to get people on the same page? How to address that situation?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, the buzzword I hear, and I'm guilty of using it myself, is transparency. It's like, oh, well, let's get better alignment here. People are asking for more transparency. Let's be more transparent. Let's talk about this. And, I overheard something recently, talking head of, the role of a leader in terms of like, how do they show up within the team, within the organization, how much positivity, optimism. We've got clarity. I'm being transparent in how we're looking toward the future and what we have to be excited about. And then how much are they keeping closer to the vest of like risk management? Like, oh, the year that we live in now and the state of the world and the state of the economy and AI and all these things that people are like, wait, what is happening? How much do I bring into that space? How much do we talk about it as a leadership team? Where some of it is outside of it's society, it's the world, and how much can we control that? And I think that there's been some leaders that I've worked for in some organizations that are deeply responsive to, well, today is the day of blank. And so therefore we know our staff are going to be thinking about it. Or this recently happened in the headlines. And so we know staff are impacted personally by this. And we want to and make sure that there's space here. Even if we can't control it, we want to create space. There's also been organizations I work for where it's like, well, we can't control what society is doing. We can control what that leader is doing in the world.
Mm.
And so we can acknowledge it, but to spend time as a team in that space of feelings or reactions doesn't help. How does that help us? And it's not asked in a snarky way. It's like, is it helping us make sure that we're doing and providing great services to the participants in our program? No. And quick answer, no. And so therefore that's a reason why we want to acknowledge and also move on and move into the space of like, what do our participants need from us now? And I think that those are really tough trade-off. Like, in my opinion, neither of them are right, neither of them are wrong. But how people feel individually, right? It's deep. I know people I work with, people I used to work with would. I know that I can't control. I know the organization cannot control this, but I would love there to be space to talk and feel because of the identities that I hold, because of the community that I live in, or where I'm from. It matters. And other people are like, my personal stuff is my personal stuff, and I come to work to have an impact in the ways that I am, and I don't need that. And I think that I've seen both of those perspectives at all the different places I've worked. And so you're not going to have a silver bullet of like, here's the culture solution, here's what we're going to do. But I think, again, to that point of awareness, to the concept of transparency, it's like, how can you name where we are actually trying to be? Where are we trying to land in this space? And again, you know, some of the best leaders I've worked for, it's not that I've agreed with everything that they do or say, but I know where they stand. And I think that's
Mm.
such an important part when I think about transparency to me is it's like, I just need to, part of it is like, I need to know where they stand on something. I need to know if they take more time to make decisions, I just need to know that that's their approach, that they're not like choosing to not engage or they're choosing to like, that they don't understand the gravity of what's being, it's like, no, I know where they stand. They are somebody who likes to collect as much information as possible before making a decision. And then in the different
Mm.
roles that I've been in, I can support that, which I think is ultimately a critical part of leadership teams, right? Is like, how do you align with what your senior leaders are doing and then support those decisions? If I know where people stand, I can much more easily figure out how I'm going to support that publicly within the organization and even broadly if needed. Then it's like, wait a minute, they said transparency, maybe it's that, maybe it's I don't like that's something now for me that I've really seek is like, okay, if we're going to say transparency, how do I make sure I understand where people stand?
Mm.
When talking about transparency, what would you say, and people, let's say people know they should be transparent, what would you say are mindsets or fears that hold leaders from having the difficult conversations, from being transparent?
That's the end of part 2 of our interview with Will. Stay tuned for next week.